Welcome back to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry. Here's your host, Brother Robert Johnson.
All right, everybody, we're back. This is episode 235. This episode is, of course, the alternate week. So we have our usual house esoteric specialist, Frater O. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks again for having me back.
So we kind of fielded yesterday or a couple days ago on Facebook. We said, what should Frater O and RJ talk about on the show? We asked the question. Some of the interesting responses that we got were funny. Some were really good questions. Juan Sepulveda of the Winding Stairs podcast said, curbing attrition, which I thought was interesting. So my comment to that was, so you want me to attrition the attrition? So I really wasn't clear on the question. However, I think I know what he was getting at. That's a great idea for a show, and I think that is something, I don't know how we would approach talking about attrition and possibly esoterics other than talking about like kind of the 1915 fall off. Erickson Ernest said, your ideal format for entered apprentice specific education besides the catechisms and an overall lodge education program. And then he says what they would consist of, how it would be organized, and why the topics in those education programs are important to Masonry. That got a bunch of likes, actually, which was interesting. I think an ideal format for the entered apprentice specific education, besides the catechisms, would essentially just be going through and decoding like a walkthrough, and decoding every little thing that they did, bringing it down. You know, Manly P. Hall said, what was it, Frater? Everything has 7 levels of hidden stuff.
I think he said 12.
12.
Oh, man.
So maybe it was 12. So maybe bring them down 6 levels and get them halfway there at least at some point. What would consist of? Again, probably a walkthrough, organized, and how it would be organized. I would have it organized as a linear kind of experience where you just walk through exactly what you did again. How would you turn that into a program? I think that's a great question. And that's where I'm going to leave it. That's what my dad used to do to me. I'd ask him questions, and he'd say, that's a good question. And then he'd take a sip of his beer and not talk to me again. So that's where I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave it there on that one. What was that, Frater?
Touche.
My good friend and brother Brian says, that's a good question. Isn't there something going on with Grand Lodges dropping recognitions of others or something? That got a few likes. And yes, there are. Mike Hambrecht said, alchemy, Kabbalah, and other ancient mysteries of the craft. That sounds like a really cool show where possibly in the future Frater O and I can go through and just kind of touch on several of the additional disciplines, maybe Cliff Notes version of the different, what we would call maybe left-hand paths. If, Brother Mike, if you're listening to the show, I would definitely urge you to go back and listen to an episode where we actually had Brother Greg Kaminsky on from the Occult of Personality podcast. He was fascinating, and he talked a lot about this stuff, and it was great.
I think, with the Grand Lodge topic, I would highly recommend to stay tuned for the Occult of Personality podcast. RJ and I, we recently just recorded that with Brother Greg, and we were very, very fortunate to be on the show, and we might kind of dabble, or RJ might get into the topic of that question.
Yes, the Grand Lodges and the recognition issue. So yeah, Brother Greg had us on, and it was a fantastic episode. We had a great time. So you'll be looking for that probably in a couple weeks, maybe a month or two. I'm not sure on his production schedule, so as soon as he lets us know, we'll let you guys know. Let's see. Austin Kenny says magic and masonry, but he spelled magic with the K again.
Ooh, with the K.
With the K, so it's a special magic. So that kind of references Enochian magic and all kinds of other neat things. Again, that might be something we cover in kind of a Cliff Notes, left-handed path stuff type episode. Again, Paul Brunetti says magic. Man, I would love to talk about magic. That would be sweet. And then Brother Bill Hosler says pancakes. And it has the Giorgio Tsoukalos from Ancient Aliens holding his hands up. It says pancakes. So, pancakes, esoteric pancakes. What did somebody call us at one point? Elitist, Martinist pancake flippers. So that's cool. Whatever.
That's how we're taking over the world.
Yeah,
right?
Pancake breakfasts.
One pancake breakfast at a time.
All right, so the topic that we settled on actually was, I know you guys had some suggestions, but not a whole lot of esoteric stuff. So we decided to kind of hit on something that we've talked about in the past briefly, and that subject is the third eye. Basically, the idea of the third eye as it takes transformations across all of these different religious systems, shamans, to mystic Catholicism, to you name it. I mean, it is everywhere. But basically, the third eye, I would give a base definition of something like a concept of some sort of the symbol, or a concept of something that allows you to have some sort of precognition, or something that allows you to access Akashic records or clairvoyance and these kind of things. But that's not all. We'll get into it, but Dr. Rick Straussman has some really interesting things about it, and there's actually some possible evolutionary ideas about the third eye, that it was a literal real thing, which basically had some sort of breakdown since it wasn't being used, an atrophy, and it basically went away. But Frater O, I'd like to just toss it over to you. The third eye. Can you give us like a brief breakdown for everybody?
Well, we've talked in the past regarding the chakras and glands and the occult anatomy we've talked about, and the allegory of King Solomon's temple pertaining to the human body. So there's significance there. So we're kind of taking a jump to the deep end if you haven't been paying attention to the past episodes. I'd highly recommend to go back and listen. And we're going right to kind of like the final step, which has been written about extensively, spoken about extensively, and it's a hot topic in a lot of esoteric circles. To kind of go off of where you just were with Dr. Rick Straussman, for those who don't know, back in 1996, there was a gentleman named Dr. Rick Straussman who was fascinated with occult circles and shamanistic circles and brews and psychedelics, and mainly pertaining to one chemical in particular called dimethyltryptamine, which is DMT. He was able to, at the time in 1996, post the psychedelic movements in the 60s, unfortunately DMT became illegal. And he was fascinated with actually doing double-blind studies and actually working with the DEA and showing that it's actually not that bad, or it's not bad at all for you, and actually prove in a scientific study in a setting with 300 patients of the effects of what DMT does. Thankfully, he was able to get grants from the Scottish Rite of the Southern Jurisdiction for funding for schizophrenia research, because it just so happens that dimethyltryptamine happens to be in the urine of schizophrenics. And with the finance of the DEA, did an amazing research study with 300 patients and injecting them with this chemical called dimethyltryptamine. The book that he came out with from his research was called DMT, or is called DMT, the Spirit Molecule. And about a handful of years ago, there was a documentary that came out showcasing and interviewing a lot of the patients that partake in this. Now, I'm going to digress just a second before we get any further into DMT or any psychedelic substances. By any way and form, the topic between RJ and I tonight is solely our own personal opinions and our own personal research. It does not reflect Masonry whatsoever or any Grand Lodge. Again, this is just from personal research. Now, talking about the doors to the subconscious. Now, you have your waking consciousness and you have your subconscious. Now, we all have the ability to access our subconscious. We can access it through dreams, and our dreams present us what our subconscious is doing. And then we have the ability through meditation to be able to shut down the monkey mind, to shut down our waking consciousness, to actually access our subconscious during conscious and being awake, which is in a meditation process. Take some time to do, but give it enough time. And if you're able to shut down the monkey mind and shut down what the psychologists call the ego, you're able to get there. Now, psychedelics, for an example, are really shortcuts there. Now, I'm not saying they're good shortcuts. They're not bad shortcuts. I don't say I condone these shortcuts by any means. However, in shamanistic circles, they've been around for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. You know, they've been working with these psychedelics. Now, back to DMT. dimethyltryptamine, it was actually found in a brew around the Amazon rainforest called ayahuasca. Now, ayahuasca, they're able to combine two plants together, one that is actually dimethyltryptamine, and then another plant that's an MAO inhibitor, or a monoxide inhibitor, that allows the proper uptake of DMT. Because if you took DMT orally, your body would not be able to absorb it, which is pretty fascinating. So out of the 80,000 plants they have in the Amazon rainforest, the shamans were able to combine the two because they believed the plants spoke to them and told them what to do. And now you can go down in more of a westernized setting and partake in these rituals with the brew and get to these unconscious doors inside of yourself. So, I mean, that's kind of like a roundabout way about, DMT and ayahuasca. But back to the third eye, right? So why are we talking about DMT? Why are we talking about ayahuasca? They all tie together is because when you partake in really deep transcendental meditations, or if you partake in psychedelic rituals, majority of the time they access these higher states of consciousness. And there's these doors inside of you, or gates. The Kabbalah talks about 12 gates, or a lot of systems talk about 12 glands or 7 veils, or there was 12 apostles, or there happened to be 7 different systems you have to cross, or veils, or paths. And there's chakras. Well, the brow chakra is referred to as the third eye, or they're referred to as Christ consciousness, or the pineal gland. Or if you look at King Solomon's temple as a human body, the Ark of the Covenant was housed in the east, and if the east was the head, the Ark of the Covenant was right there.
Right, so the idea that the pineal gland, or the Ark of the Covenant, actually represented the pineal gland.
Absolutely. I know I've been rambling on here for a little bit. Do you care to chime in at all?
Sure. So all I would say is that the idea is to kind of connect these dots even further for you, is that the third eye is either just a concept or it is real. If it is real, it is related to the literal pineal gland, which is inside of your head in the middle of your brain. It is a gland that is totally real, and the studies have shown in lab animals, and they believe it is the same in humans, that the pineal gland produces dimethyltryptamine, or DMT. It automatically does this. And so when you access these higher states of consciousness, and when we say higher states of consciousness, we're not talking about hocus pocus. We're literally talking about you hit a magic spot when you learn how to meditate properly, and you'll get there, and boom, you're in the zone. And when you're in the zone, that's when you might be accessing these kind of very surreal states of existence. And in those states, it is believed that we may be accessing our pineal gland and forcing the pineal gland to release or flood the brain with dimethyltryptamine. Dimethyltryptamine has been written about several times. You can find pretty interesting articles, like say on Vice News about DMT, but really what you find on those articles are people who find it in a form and then they smoke the DMT, which is not recommended at all because it's such a violent shoot straight into this field of vision and a violent take back, where they describe it. It's very violent inside your head. It's quick, it's brutal, not forgiving at all. Things like ayahuasca is a plant, again, a plant-based drink that's taken down in South America, as Frater O had said. What's interesting about the drink is that great care is taken when you partake in that ceremony. People are there to watch over you and hold you literally in their arms while you are in the state. And what's interesting is everybody kind of comes back and talks about so much of the same things. They talk about meeting beings and seeing geometric shapes, and of course this is probably chakras or something of that nature. And the downside, of course, to the drink is that you're actually ingesting something. So this is not something that you take lightly. There are side effects of DMT. Ayahuasca can range anywhere from severe vomiting to diarrhea after. So there's a lot of stuff that's wild with this. So it's not something that we can say, go out and buy this, and this, and you can do it. By no means. If you ever decide to do something like that, you need to make sure you're with the people who do it for their religious and spiritual practices, because then you know that at least you're doing it in a way that is been done for millennia. I should also mention, now that's kind of where it ties into that pineal gland, but there's so many, different religious groups and belief systems that mention this third eye, so I'll go through a couple of them, and then Frater, if you want to just jump in. One of them is, of course, associated with, I guess, in a new age kind of way, we look at it as higher consciousness, we look at it as enlightenment, spiritual and psychological enlightenment, possibly even religious visions, clairvoyance, auras, precognitions, out-of-body experiences. I've experienced probably 4 or 5 of those different types while doing deep meditations myself, including out-of-body experiences. Some of the other things in there you can move on to, like chakras. Chakras is huge. So in traditions in like Hinduism, they look at the third eye being kind of in the middle of the forehead and above the eyebrows. And so then there's other traditions that'll say, again, connected to the pineal gland. And I kind of wanted to jump into the factual kind of grasping at this a little bit. So one of the most interesting theories that I've heard, and I had no idea about this until I was researching some of it, but it's believed that humans are first forms, or some form of human, before we are the way we are now. We had an actual third eye on the back of our heads, which had a physical and spiritual function. And according to the theory, it says over time, as humankind evolved, the eye atrophied and sunk into what is known today as the pineal gland. Dr. Rick Straussman somewhat backs this up by saying that the pineal gland is light sensitive. So why would something buried inside your head have any kind of light sensitivity? And then they go into talking about that with reptiles. So reptiles and amphibians have light sensitive via a third parietal eye, which is a structure associated with the pineal gland, and it serves to regulate their circadian rhythms for navigation and sense polarization of light. And so with that, their circadian rhythm, of course, is like your rhythms of going to sleep and waking up, and all sorts of interesting things. C.W. Ledbetter, he talked about extending etheric tubes from the third eye, making it possible to develop microscopic and telescopic vision, even going so far as to say you could see quarks, which is a very small subatomic particle.
There's a good book that he wrote. It's called These Chakras, if anyone's interested in it. And it was, let's say it was published back in the 20s. And he dives in deeper, with the more of the theosophy movement building off of Hinduism on the occult anatomy. And he starts getting into, I think it's called Tedewantas. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation on that. And he gets more into soul groups and Akashic records, and then how to develop the internal aspect of the gland by eating healthier, to even building off of the internal aspects of what you eat, but then how you think and how you feel, and how that plays into the emotional body as well.
So one of the things what's interesting is this is a really deep topic, and we are 2 Masons talking about it, and I guess there are probably brothers out there right now listening to this going, what does this have to do with Masonry? But again, what it has to do with Masonry is the fact that this is, again, as Frater O had pointed out, kind of the end game of the mother of all of these kind of systems. We talk about making good men better, and perhaps that's an allegory that we learn about through these stories that play around Solomon's temple, which is the body of man, what's located at the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant, or the brain, the pineal gland. So you can really see these parallels, and we're not reaching. The 1972 issue Intender program for the state of Illinois states that the human body is the allegory for Solomon's temple. It's not up for debate. I mean, it's what it is. For most Masons who dive in, that's what they find. And what's interesting is you tie all this in because, again, this is kind of that end game. And it's like the wagon wheel where this The Gnostics would believe, I guess, that the main goal to life is to escape this earthly body or to wake up. And so what is that waking up? Is it activating that pineal gland? Is that pineal gland your link to the Akashic record? Is that your link to the Creator? It's really interesting stuff. So you have this kind of wagon wheel where all spokes lead to the center, and this kind of concept of a third eye or an allegory around it, or its function in making humanity wake up, is kind of, I'll say, vaguely in the center. The idea, even, I had talked about it in Christianity, according to a neo-Gnostic teaching, a guy named Samuel Weir. He talks about the third eye being referenced symbolically and functionally several times in the book of Revelation, 3:7 through 13. And he says, as a whole, he believes that it describes Kundalini in its progression upwards through 3.5 turns of 7 chakras. The interpretation equates the third eye with the 6th and 7th churches of Asia detailed therein, the Church of Philadelphia. So, pretty interesting stuff. I mean, this gets pulled from everywhere, and everybody kind of connects to it. It's mentioned in Taoism, Theosophist H.P. Blavatsky. Again, we did talk about C.W. Ledbetter. So even Buddhism and Tibetan practices talk about it.
You keep seeing this same allegory represented over and over and over in many different systems. If you want to look at the Greek allegory of Zeus, and he swallows the goddess of the goddess of wisdom, who happens to be Athena, which is a very, very popular icon in Masonic temples, or she happens to be very popular in D.C. as well. And she's also represented as the owl of wisdom. And it just so happens that Athena is, after she's swallowed whole, she actually is birthed, or she pushes herself out of the forehead of Zeus. And the forehead is really significant, like we mentioned earlier, as the third eye. So it's these same allegories that are represented over and over and over. Ultimately, we found in our research that it always comes back to the human temple. And the Gothic cathedrals we've talked about in the past have all been laid out systematically, consistently with the architecture of a human body. And it's really interesting in where the head is, why the head is in a certain place, and then why most of the time is there a steeple either in 2 places in these Gothic cathedrals. At the highest point, it's either right over the heart, or it's usually right over the third eye. It's really, really fascinating. And if you have some time to look at Google Maps, there's been some really cool stuff around DC. If you look at what we've spoken about, and then you can actually see it built into the architecture, it's pretty cool.
It's totally there. We've actually taken some images of Solomon's Temple, some artist renditions of the Western equivalent, Camelot, and laid them over certain cathedrals, certain land areas, and we don't know for sure, right? Because you can't. But man, when you play with it in Photoshop, you can layer these things and adjust kind of the opacity of the image, and you can line it up almost perfectly to anything. And I guess, there is the argument, of course, there's guys out there who are going to say, if you look hard enough, you'll find connections. And that's true. But you don't have to look very hard to see it. It's pretty striking. Going back to the pineal gland, part of the endocrine system, which chakra is the endocrine system, Frater?
So all the chakras are actually part of the endocrine system. So we have 7 chakras we've mentioned in the past. And so we have the first chakra, which is the root chakra. And it actually is based off of the adrenal glands. The root chakra is supposed to be with our connection with Earth and our groundedness, and the sense of safety and security and our primordial needs, and pretty much overall vitality and life force. It's pretty much the base of the spine. If we look at the rod of Hermes as the spinal column, or the 33 vertebrae, it's of the coiled serpent. It's pretty much where it activates. It's where the beginning of it. And then we have the second chakra, which is the pelvic area, which is the color of orange, which is pretty much the reproductive system, depending on the sex. It just sits right below the navel, and it has to do with the sexual creativity and the expressive aspects of ourselves. This is a heavy emotional center that has to do with our ability for empathic, to pick up on things. It also for us, it's the ability to pick up on someone else's mood that's around us inside of our own body. So the third chakra is referred to as the solar plexus region, or it's the endocrine glands that are associated with this, or like the liver, gallbladder, stomach, and pancreas. It's pretty interesting to note that we always talk about solar plexus, but there's a big significance between gut feelings and going with your gut, or gut feelings, and when you have bad feelings from your stomach and we don't listen to them. They're referred to as the stomach as the second brain. And the solar aspect, it's the sun. There's some really fascinating images and the secret teachings of all ages by Manly P. Hall, and he gets into this really deep aspect and how significant the solar plexus are. Again, this is located above the navel. It's the center of personal power, boundaries, protection, will, ego, self-esteem, gut feelings, and expression, like I mentioned before. Along with the fourth chakra, it's part of your psychic immune system, which has been written extensively about by one woman in particular called Barbara Brennan. She wrote a book series called The Hands of Healing Light. She talks about how it's like a form of Reiki and channeling energy or chi through your body and learning how to control these glands and these systems. On to the fourth chakra. It's the heart chakra. So it's also in touch with the thymus gland. This is associated body parts are the hearts, the lungs, the arms, the hands, the shoulders, ribs, and qualities is pretty much for love and acceptance, compassion for oneself, and also for others. The fifth chakra is the throat. It's also pretty much, there's one significant gland there in the endocrine system, which is the thyroid, which is pretty significant because this gland and this chakra is all about communication. This chakra governs the throat, the ears, and the nose, and the teeth, and the neck, that whole area. So it's pretty interesting if you have an imbalance somewhere in one gland or one part of your body, it's a chain. This energy that flows through the system fails. There was some sort of cartoon that gets deeply into this we could possibly throw up online. I remember seeing it online regarding, like, if you think about chakras as all these little ponds, or this little stream, if you have a blockage in the stream, the energy doesn't flow properly. Well, it's the same idea with these glands. They can get junked up and clogged up through eating horrible things, but also emotional traumas or physical traumas. They can actually lodge there, especially things that mentally in the past, they can actually find themselves and manifest around these organs. A lot of cancers are usually found, unfortunately, around the endocrine system. But digressing back to the chakra system, the sixth chakra, which is referred to as the third eye, the pituitary gland, it's the emotional center, which is for truth, intuition, information, fact collecting, dreaming, mental activities. This is the center that's associated with psychic abilities, and also mediumship or clairvoyance, so to speak. And then in the final and the last chakra, which is referred to as the crown. Which is also the pineal gland that we were talking about, where this is the gateway supposedly to these higher states of consciousness. And until you've mastered the lower realms, and until you've mastered each chakra and each emotional area, because they go hand in hand, then you're able to unlock this final door, so to speak, that's been written about through so many different cultures and religions and esoteric societies.
I find it fascinating, the parallels. What's really interesting is, chakras in itself we just went through them all, and they're all connected to the system. And what's really striking, I guess you would say, is that the idea of chakras, of course, is a metaphysical concept that some do believe in, some don't believe in, but there has to be some truth to it. We look at if you look at exactly what the pineal gland is it is a part of that endocrine system. It produces melatonin, which is used in sleeping and your biorhythm. I should say it helps out with your sleep patterns. The shape of the pineal gland is kind of like a small pine cone, and so that's why it's named the pineal or the pineal.
If you don't mind me chiming in here, you mentioned the pine cone. Manly P. Hall gets pretty much into this extensively in his book, Man, the Grand Symbol of the Mysteries of Thoughts and Occult Anatomy. It's wonderful. If you get a chance, there's one chapter in particular, he gets into it. It's, give me a second here, chapter 16. He gets extensively into the pineal gland and talks about how the pine cone you can find in a lot of Roman or Christian statues consistently.
It's just really interesting to me anyway, the way it's depicted and its connection. I mean, the science. I mean, if you just talk the science of the pineal gland, think about how amazing it is just in this. Even if it has nothing to do with anything else, it seems to be a driving force in our thoughts and everything else. And if people like René Descartes, who in his first book called The Treatise of Man, which was written before 1637, was infatuated with the idea of the pineal gland. But if you look at the science, right, so the structure, it's super small. It's like the size of a grain of rice. It's kind of grayish red in hue and the color. It's saturated with blood and cerebral spinal fluid. So it's constantly seated. And then some of the interesting things, so if you look at scientific function, again, melatonin is what it's officially saying that it does. But melatonin is a type of tryptamine, or a type of amino acid, or a tryptophan, which has a lot of different functions, even in your central nervous system. But what's really interesting is even the science kind of backs up exactly what other people have thought it does. It talks about that, so the production of melatonin by the pineal gland is stimulated by darkness and inhibited by light. So you have these photosensitive cells in your retina that detect light, and it sends these signals basically to the gland, and then the gland produces the chemical and a basis that's what kind of maybe regulates your sleep patterns. That's why people take things like melatonin to sleep. Also protects you against neurodegeneration, which happens in your brain. One of the big things you guys might see on things like Facebook or whatever, it talks about how tap water basically calcifies your pineal gland. Well, even in scientific studies, they address calcification of the gland. So I'll just read the bit here. Calcification of the pineal gland is typically 1% of study participants in young adults and has been observed in children as young as 2 years of age. The calcified gland is often seen in skull X-rays. Calcification rates vary widely by country and correlate with an increase in age, with calcification occurring in an estimated 40% of Americans by their 17th year. Pretty scary. It's scary in the sense of you don't know why it's being calcified, but it goes on. It says calcification of the pineal gland is largely associated with corpora arnaxia, also known as quote-unquote brain sand. It seems that the internal secretions of the pineal gland inhibit the development of reproductive glands, because in cases where the pineal gland has been severely damaged in kids, it results in accelerated development of sexual organs and the skeleton. So in some cases it does something, and they think that's why it may calcify. It may calcify on purpose to regulate your growth. But some studies show that the degree of pineal gland calcification is significantly higher in patients with Alzheimer's disease versus other types of dementia. Pineal gland calcification may also contribute to the pathogenesis of Alzheimer's disease and may reflect an absence of crystallization inhibitors. It says calcium, phosphorus, and fluoride deposits in the pineal gland have been correlated with aging, showing that as the brain ages, more deposits collect. So could it be like the key to keeping a sharp mind is somehow keeping your pineal gland from calcifying? It seems to be this seat of knowledge, or this seat of at least not going insane or forgetting everything, is maybe perhaps in the key of this pineal gland.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I wish I had some answers. Unfortunately, if you research any of this online, the conspiracy theorists get a hold of it and they just go completely crazy, and they talk about the fluoride in the water and calcification and
so that's kind of what I was. I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. That's kind of what I was alluding to, was some of these posts and memes on Facebook or whatever, wherever you see it, it'll say, "Don't drink water with fluoride. It's calcifying your pineal gland, and you're never going to have gnosis," or whatever the case may be. I digress. Back to you.
But here's the crazy thing is, thoughts, actions, and words are really what's calcifying it. And it's that simple. And not to mention diet. Diet's a huge factor as well. I mean, if you're not feeding your cells properly, you're not actually proper balanced state, so to speak. And in the first degree, you're taught polarity, right? Or actually, first and second degree, you're talking about male and female. You're taught these two passwords. You're taught these two things. And if you look at any master's carpet, especially from like the 1700s or 1800s, and for those who are listening that are Masons that aren't familiar with master carpets, because in some lodges they unfortunately don't exist, they're like a tracing board. They're a board with all kinds of the carpets that have pretty much all the working tools that have been presented to you through all 3 degrees. And they're laid out in a way where there happens to be a sun and a moon on each side. There happens to be Jacob's ladder. There happens to be the 2 pillars. There happens to be 3 candles. There happens to be a heart and a star, and then a few other things, as well as just so happens to be 7 stars. And then usually at the top of it, there's the all-seeing eye. So, it's kind of, if we look at it as the human body and the polarity and the sun and the moon and, the microcosm, the macrocosm on the globes on the top of each pillar, there's massive significance back to the human body. And a lot of people can refer to Richard Casaro. He writes extensively in one book. It's a great book for those Masons that are really into it. So
Sure.
The book is called Written in Stone. It's an awesome read. If you get a chance to check it out, I highly recommend it. He is a brother. He is from the Grand Lodge of New York, and he, if you get a chance, he gives an amazing lecture on the deeper aspects. And his book dives very deep on topics that we've just scratched the surface on.
Yeah, there's so much we can go into on the topic. I mean, I hate to use the term pseudoscience because it is tied to kind of hocus pocus weird stuff, but there are parts of pseudoscience that are legit, that people, I guess, people swear by. I'm not saying, don't go to the doctor for this or that. I'm saying that there are elements of these meditations and these kind of higher states of consciousness, if they do in fact turn on the pineal gland, or this third eye as we're calling it, what is its ultimate purpose, and why have we kind of lost it? It brings up all these kind of questions. An interesting note is that as far as the pineal gland is concerned, that most, if not all, animals on the planet all have a pineal gland. They say except for something called a hagfish, which is often thought of as a really primitive vertebrate. But even the hagfish has a pineal equivalent structure in its body. So what is it about this thing that's so ingrained for life? I should also go back and mention, because I did talk a little while ago about René Descartes, or Descartes. The book he wrote, The Treatise of Man, which again was written before 1637, it was published after he was dead, posthumously. And I should say that no matter what I said about him and his thoughts and theories, much of his book was, as far as anatomy is considered and things, just wrong. Like we now know that it's not true. And so even at his own time, a lot of the things he was saying, they knew scientifically weren't true. However, I don't want to say to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there is some neat things in that book if you guys ever get a shot to read it. We'll put some links up for that, and also some of the books that Frater O has that he's gone through also. So Frater, there's a guy that you know who happens to be clandestine. He's a co-mason. So for us regular guys, he's, Clandy or whatever you want to call it, but he's a great guy. His name is Dr. Bruce S. Fisher, and he has written some books that I have opened, read a paragraph, and then read it again, and then read it again, and then read it again, and then had to take some ibuprofen, and then read it again, because he writes at this amazing level, and it is so conceptually difficult, but he's trying to put it out there the easiest way possible. But it's difficult to do that, I guess. I'd invite Frater O to have a few words, because his writing is amazing.
Yep. Dr. Fisher is great. He's an alchemist. He lectures, a spiritual alchemist, of course. He lectures extensively at a lot of alchemy conferences, and during our research that we were focusing on the occult anatomy, he wrote a series of books called the the Grand Reflections of the Cosmos. Studies in Occult Anatomy. It's a 3-book series, very, very detailed. Probably if you're really looking to get into the hidden anatomy, it's the deepest you're probably going to find out of. Trust me, when RJ and I have spent a good 4 or 3 years on this research.
Yeah,
and his stuff blows us away. And he comes from a very analytical background and being a scientist, so it's written from that standpoint. And I just picked it up here recently, during the show, and I had to put it back down, is because there's just so much going on it's over my head. And,
it's overwhelming if you're a layman, for sure. Like, if you're a layman, go to college for 10 years and come back. I mean, it's intense stuff.
That's very well said. I think this would be great if we could actually bring Bruce on the show and have him interact.
Yeah, we should. We'll try to get a good schedule going where possibly we can get Dr. Bruce Fisher to come on the program and talk a little bit about at least the Occultum Anatomy Reflections Cosmos series, because it's ridiculous awesome. The diagrams and everything he even has in there are just, thank God there's some pictures. That's all I can say.
There's a lot of pictures, thank God. It's which is good for us that like to learn visually.
Yeah, definitely. So I hope you guys really liked the program. Frater O and I were going to also dive into kind of the esoteric areas of diet and chakras and kind of health, but that's a whole nother hour of material. So we are going to do another show probably in a couple weeks on that very subject, and we'll probably follow that up with Dr. Bruce Fisher. And we always like just talking and about these subjects, and I hope that if it's something you're interested in, you've enjoyed it and felt like you're a part of the conversation.
So there's a proverb, I don't know the particular proverb off the top of my head, but it goes as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he.
True words.
I'll leave it at that.
Frater, thanks for coming on the show, blowing our minds once again. Really appreciate the time and taking us out, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Well, thanks again for having me on. I look forward to the future fraternal discussions.
Absolutely. And again, everybody, we'll let you know when that interview with A Cult of Personality with host Greg Kaminsky comes on. Frater O and I are both on that episode, and it was really a lot of fun. So we'll talk to you guys later on. All right, I really hope you guys enjoyed the interview. Again, just always a great time talking to Frater O about wild topics. So with that, I do need to mention our sponsor for the program, which is Brothers Blend Coffee, www.brothersblendcoffee.com. What is Brothers Blend Coffee? Well, it's a great charity that is run from Montgomery Lodge in Milford, Massachusetts, to provide the finest coffee to the brethren wheresoever disperse their friends, families, and colleagues. And it is a fundraiser to support the charitable causes, activities, and maintenance of that lodge. It comes in 3 great varieties: Tyler's Cup, Harmony Roast, and Adonairam's Brew, which, again, Adonairam's Brew, you've heard me say it in the past, is my favorite. Although Tyler's Cup is pretty darn delicious. They're all great coffees. You can check them out. They will be at Masonicon, happening up in the Northeast there. I hope you guys get a chance to stop by and see them. The coffees do come in 12-ounce containers, or 340 grams, roasted by Red Bean Coffee Roasters in Hopkinton, Mass. So it's all together pretty darn local of a project. Junior wardens and Masonic caterers can get discounts on large orders. They're about $1 an ounce is what it kind of works out to for you. So you get 12 ounces, and that will cost you $10.69 plus $3.99 to ship. So a little more than $1 an ounce for the coffee. But it's really good coffee, and it's a great cost, so please check it out. www.brothersblendcoffee.com. Other ways to support this program: of course, we have our limited edition shop where you can pick up the lapel pins, you can pick up some cufflinks. We are totally sold out of tie bars, and we have some money clips left as well. In addition to that, you can support the show by stopping by onnetlabs.com, picking up either Alpha Brain or Alpha Brain Instant or any number of the great products they have there. So Alpha Brain, you get increased focus. It's all natural. There's no dyes even in the capsules. Vegan approved. Some of the benefits are things like lucid dreamings and heightened awareness. And it does all this without caffeine, so pretty cool stuff. And so if you want to get some of that, please go to our website, wcypodcast.com, click on support the show, and click through our banners for onit.com. That's how they know to kick a little bit of the funding back our way. So if you do that, you can click on those banners. You then can use the promo code WCY at the checkout, and you'll get 10% off. So it's a win-win situation. Of course, you can donate directly to the show via PayPal. So you can do that in any number of donations. You can donate 50 cents. You can donate $5. Whatever you can, all goes right into the cost of this show, and it pays for the hosting. And we keep all our episodes available all the time. There's no back catalog. Another great way to support the program is, of course, by going to freemasonryart.com, and you can use the promo code WCY to get 10% off your order there as well. And I hope you guys all check those out, because freemasonryart.com is, of course, run by our friend and brother Juan Sepulveda of the Winding Stairs, and he has some really great art. And I hope you guys enjoy it. Pick some great art up and hang it up in your home office or at your lodge. I'm sure it will be amazing. With that, we're going to go right into this week's Famous Freemason. So this week's Famous Freemason comes to us from the Scottish Rite Northern Jurisdiction's Facebook page. Reverend Josiah Henson was a great brother. He was actually born into slavery in 1789, and in 1829 he escaped from Maryland and made his way into Canada, where he became a Methodist preacher. Harriet Beecher Stowe met Reverend Henson in Boston. He is widely believed to be the inspiration for Uncle Tom's Cabin. In 1876, Brother Henson published Uncle Tom's Story of His Life, an autobiography of the Reverend Josiah Henson. At the age of 48, he became a militia captain of the 2nd Essex Company in the Canadian Army during the Rebellion of 1837. He wrote of the time in his autobiography saying, "My company held Fort Maiden from Christmas till the following May, and also took the schooner Anne and captured all it carried. The men were willing to help defend the government that had given them a home when they had fled from slavery." End quote. Brother Henson was a member of Mount Moriah Lodge No. 4 of Prince Hall Lodge in Dresden, Ontario, Canada, where he is buried. His headstone bears a Masonic square and compass. He was the first black gentleman to be commemorated on Canadian postage stamps. That's it for this week. I hope you enjoyed the program. Please remember to find us on Facebook, follow on Twitter. And before we close it out this week, I want to take a minute to remind everybody that we are going to be March 19th in Pennsylvania at the Academy of Masonic Knowledge. It's not too late to put your reservations in. It is a free event. They're asking for $10 at lunchtime as a donation. You can hear lectures by myself, John Ruark, Jason Richards, Juan Sepulveda, and Nick Johnson. It's going to be a great time, and we'll have a lot of fun. In addition to that, because I'll be out of town, the episode next week will be hosted by Brother Adam Thayer. I know you'll all love it. He's got a great program lined up for you, and the audio quality is top-notch with the new equipment. So I hope you guys all enjoy. Again, speaking of the Masonic Roundtable, please don't forget to check out the show every Tuesday night. This Tuesday, we will be talking, I believe, about applied masonry. I will not be on the program. I will be presenting in Appleton, Wisconsin, and we'll have a really great time there. I'll be presenting on the topic of the word, or the tetragrammaton. So we'll see how that goes, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun with that. The Masonic Roundtable, again, goes live every Tuesday at 10/9 Central. So it is on YouTube, it's on Hangouts, and it is also syndicated forever on iTunes as a podcast. So until, 2 weeks from now, you guys stay on the level. I hope to see you in Pennsylvania for Whence Came You. I'm Robert Johnson.
You've been listening to Whence Came You, a Masonic podcast featuring research papers and discussions related to Freemasonry with your host, Brother Robert Johnson. Be sure to join us for our next edition.